Well, hey, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another virtual event this evening. And tonight we have best-selling author Marie Benedict. She's going to be discussing her brand new book, Her Hidden Genius. And Marie was kind enough to sign a bunch of them for us. And I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field on YouTube and Facebook, should you wish to purchase one. And then I'll also be monitoring the comments and questions fields. So if you have questions for Marie, go ahead and put them in anytime throughout the hour, and Barbara will summon me back up towards the end of the hour. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Before you disappear, I would like you to hold up your book again, because my book, which is the advanced reading copy, as you can see, looks different. And I thought Marie might like to, and it's very nice to see you again, Marie.
Nice to see you.
You might like to point out what's an interesting, the design of the cover, because it really is very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, it's such a bold, striking cover, and I love it. And it has so much symbolism embedded in it. You know, Rosalind Franklin, my heroine, of course, was the brilliant British scientist who was the discoverer of the structure of DNA, the double helix that's so famous. And right here, I hope I can give it justice, we have a double helix. It's very subtle, and it really encompasses the woman, which I love. The other thing that I think is so symbolic and really unique about it is, as I'm sure we'll talk about tonight, one of the key elements of the story is her technique, which actually allowed her, it was laborious, but allowed her to really unlock the secrets of DNA. And as you can see, there are X-ray images here. So I love the color. It's such a symbolic homage to Rosalind and her legacy.
You know, I can remember reading James Watson's The Double Helix, and it was like, you know, it was a revelatory book at the time that he published it. And there wasn't any mention of Rosalind. It was very much a James Watson and a couple of men at Cambridge. Exactly. And so one of the things that Marie has made a writing career out of is looking at women who made major contributions to things, but were not necessarily recognized. Now, I'm going to say also, before we go any farther, that for some weird reason, I keep having this internet connection issue with my laptop. So if I freeze up or whatever, Marie can just keep talking.
I'll keep talking.
And I'll come back, or Patrick will come in, and I apologize. This just cropped up the other day, and I have no idea why it came along. In any case, Marie's originally, if I remember, your first subject was Albert Einstein's wife.
The other Einstein, that's right. So the first book in sort of this narratively, thematically connected series was the story of Albert Einstein's wife, who was a physicist in her own right. They met at university together where they were pursuing physics degrees. And the story really explores not only their relationship, but the role she very may well have played in the creation of his four most famous theories. They were married during that time. And, you know, I found a very brief mention of her in a children's biography, which I was reading with my science-focused son at the time. And I just thought, what are the odds? Number one, that Albert Einstein was married to a physicist, and I'd never heard of it. And secondly, that these two physicists were married, living together day in, day out during his miracle year. What are the odds that she had nothing to do with his theory or theories? And that sent me down the rabbit hole of research, and I excavated, gosh, this most magnificent woman whose story really did deserve to be told, but really was invisible as far as we were concerned, modern day audiences.
Well, one thing you certainly revealed to us is that while we may revere scientists, they weren't necessarily admirable people, or gave credit where it all goes. I like the title of The Other Einstein because it's a bit of a parallel to The Other Boleyn Girl, which, you know, everybody thinks about Anne Boleyn and doesn't realize that her older sister, Mary, was actually the first of the family to sleep with Henry VIII. And I might add, the only woman he ever slept with who had a healthy son, who was Queen Elizabeth's cousin and lived on. And so you recognize that if Henry had just stuck with Mary,
It would be
he
a
would have
very
had,
different world.
yeah, he divorced Catherine for the wrong wife. But I like that parallel that maybe you didn't intend it, but that's
Oh,
what.
no, we thought of that. And the other thing, we wanted to use Einstein, not only because, of course, it's in part about Albert Einstein, although it's really Maleva's story, but because the word Einstein has become so synonymous with genius that we wanted to make sure that people knew we were talking about the other genius, and really the one who was side by side with him during that really pivotal period in his career.
Well, it's a fascinating book. Then you moved on to Andrew Carnegie and his
I
maid.
did. I did.
And then we met, if I remember, I'm not sure, was it the third book, the Hedy Lamarr book, or if I missed a book?
No, that's exactly right. It was
Excellent.
the only woman in the room. That's right.
So, I mean, I was fascinated by the fact that Hedy Lamarr, who we all know is a glamorous Hollywood actress, although
Right.
European born, and Marie shows us that Hedy actually contributed to the development. I think, was it radar or sonar? Which one was it?
So it was Wi-Fi, actually. She created, she was really all these parts of her personality that were hidden, right? The fact that she was a Jewish refugee, the fact that she was married to a Nazi arms dealer, and so she was privy to all this unbelievable secret weaponry information, and then of course that she was actually a scientist. She tinkered. And when she came to America and she established herself in the career that we know her for today, she started to tinker on this sort of golden ticket that they were looking for during World War II, a wireless torpedo system. And she came up with a plan. She submitted it to the Navy. And of course, they were like, I don't think so, Hedy Lamarr. What do you know about weaponry? You're this beautiful woman. And so she continued to tinker after that. But, I think that was really in many ways sort of the kibosh on bringing out that part of who she was. But what was fascinating to me, and one of the reasons I chose to tell her story, despite the fact that it's like a crazy page turner of a life, is that invention, that wireless torpedo system, which she called a secret communication system, actually over the decades was the foundation for Wi-Fi. So when we use, our devices all day, every day, as we are right now, we're using her invention, which I just think is magnificent.
It is magnificent. How I wish you were here to deal with my whatever it is problem. But in any case, you could see that book was a natural choice for the Brandeis Book and Author Luncheon, which raises money every year for Brandeis University, Jewish institution. And Marie and I met then. She was the speaker. We were the bookseller. And but we didn't really get to talk. So this is a wonderful opportunity to carry on. Now, since then, you've written about Clementine Churchill, Winston's wife. And you did a book that I really loved, because I have spent an inordinate amount of time at the Morgan Library in New York, because I'm a librarian before I was a bookseller, except I was at the Library of Congress. But anybody worth their salt as a rare books and interested librarian is going to make pilgrimages to JP Morgan's library. And there's a film there that you can watch. I'm sure Marie has seen it, about Belle DaCosta Green, who is JP Morgan's handpicked rare books dealer. And, for somebody like Morgan, this came up the other night, Marie, and I'm trying to think I know, I was talking to Eva Trusik, about her book, The Department of Rare Books and Special Collections, that institutional buying is very different than if you have somebody like JP Morgan or Henry Frick, or in fact, my husband's grandfather, Lessing Rosenwald, who, had their own money and were able to purchase without having to go through like committee approval and worry about budgets and all the rest. But because they were busy making money, which is how they could afford to do all this, they picked somebody to actually do acquisitions and all sorts of stuff. And Belle DaCosta Green was a really fascinating character. And you wrote that with another author, didn't you?
I wrote that with Victoria Christopher Murray. So, I found Belle DaCosta Green not through a movie, although I have seen the movie. I actually came across her. I used to love to go to the Morgan Library. I was Barbara and I, we were both, you you're a retired lawyer. I'm a recovering lawyer, right? I was a commercial litigator in New York City for way too long, but I used to kind of sneak out and go to the Morgan Library. It was really a refuge for me. And anyone who's never been there, it is, I think, one of the most beautiful libraries. It's so striking. And this was, it's been a long time since I stopped practicing. So this was probably 20 to 25 years ago. And I happened to come across a docent who mentioned Bell to me. She basically just said that, the collection wasn't built by JP Morgan alone. It was really, in many ways, organized, made cohesive, made into the world-class institution that it was by this woman, Belle Costa Green. And I kind of added her to this list of women I thought I'd maybe want to write about one day. And as the decades, sadly, progressed, more and more information came out about her. And not only was she, this remarkable tour de force, I mean, she was a celebrity. She was really super powerful in the art and rare books and library world during her lifetime. But she was actually Black, passing as white. This was at a time of segregation. And so she had this huge secret that she was hiding every day. And she came from this really incredible background. Her father was the first Black man to go to Harvard, and her mother's side of the family was this really well-educated group of free Blacks who had lived in Washington, D.C. for generations. And she had to turn her back on all of that to become who she became. So I felt that as a white woman, I definitely couldn't envision what it would be like to be a Black woman in the world. And so I knew I needed to find a partner. I wanted to. And I was so fortunate one day to read one of Victoria's books. And I thought, I wonder if Victoria's a Black woman. And the book I was reading was about this horrible, this crisis of the shooting of young Black men in our country. But she told the story from the perspective of the women, which of course is what I do. And I reached out to her and we just connected instantly. And it's really been a really magnificent experience for me as a person too. I've learned such a tremendous amount, but bringing Belle Costa to the world has been, it's just really been a gift as well.
Oh, she's certainly somebody that deserved it for all kinds of reasons. And JP Morgan did not live that long after they formed their alliance. And so she had to overcome objections from his heirs and so forth to continue in her role. I've often speculated, Marie, that that Lessing Rosenwald moved Sears and Roebuck's headquarters from Chicago to Philadelphia, where he had a beautiful home in a place called Alberthorpe, which is now a community center, but was his estate. Because his rare book buyer, I think his name was Henry Rosenthal. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the man's name. Anyway, he was located in Philadelphia. And, I realized that that might not be true. There may be many other reasons, but since you have experienced the grip of bibliolepsy or bibliophilia, whatever you want to call it, I don't think that my hunch there is 100% wrong.
Oh, it sounds right. I mean, that relationship between, the patron, the person who's forming this collection, and that librarian or curator, whatever. I mean, Belle was called a librarian, but she was really like a curator and negotiator. She filled so many roles. It sounds like yours did as well. That is such a precious and rare relationship of trust that when you find that person, absolutely, I could see that being a reason for a relocation. You can't really discount collector mania. There's a new word that it's actually a title of a new well-reviewed book from Soho Press called bibliolepsy, in which books and sex are intertwined in the Philippines. So, there we go. But I do think bibliophilia is something that, that we know. And, you see it in other, one of the things I love about the Morgan Library, for example, is he collected musical manuscripts. And you can go there and you can gaze upon Mozart and remind yourself that Mozart, the most astonishing thing about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, in my opinion, was that he was a one draft composer. Yes.
You just didn't see that. But it just came right out of him, down on the page. No annotations, no revisions, no whatever, just immaculate. And it's thanks to somebody like Morgan that some of those manuscripts survive and support that theory. But anyway, we're now moving
Oh, I
on.
agree with
We're
you.
going to finally get to this book. You'll be so glad to know that.
Ah,
Started
love
this
talking about,
preparation.
I feel like I'm on such a mission with my work that I love talking about all the women that I've written about, but I'm very happy to talk about Belle DeCosta, great Rosalind Franklin, who was
And I agree with you. I think she's completely fascinating. And, there were some rumors after the Double Helix came out, unsubstantiated rumors, that there had been a woman or other scientists involved that didn't get, I think it was Crick, isn't it, Watson and Crick, that didn't get really credit. But I'm really glad that you brought her story forward. And, there's an author named Gillian Cantor who wrote a really interesting book last year about Marie Curie. And one of the things both of you talk about is that here are these pioneering women scientists dealing in dangerous things. And both of them, it probably killed them, the exposure to radiation. And, because they didn't know enough to protect themselves from it. But they were also they had their version of bibliophilia, except that it was, science oriented, that they ended up, both of them, sacrificing their lives essentially to what they were working with. So I just found it interesting because Jillian and I did an event last year for the Marie Curie book, and now I see you lay a groundwork in this book. This isn't a mystery, so we can actually talk about the end here.
Yeah, we can.
I never get to do that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a spoiler that she sacrificed her life for her discoveries. I think most people, if they know about Rosalind Franklin, they know that she didn't survive, and that I don't think a lot of people really understand the lengths that she went and the labors that she had to undergo in order to make the discovery that she did. When she was always kind of in the periphery of my awareness. And when I'm always looking for these women, I keep a list of these women. And by the way, just as a side, I loved Jillian's book. I actually blurbed that book and she blurbed mine.
Remember, yeah.
And I thought her look at the possibilities for Marie Curie's life were so insightful. That was such a striking, lovely book.
The alternative life that she created, if instead she had chosen this would have been her life, was, I thought, a really fascinating way.
Really fascinating. And what she didn't play out, which sometimes I think about in this book, is that other what if. What would have happened to all of us if Marie Curie hadn't have done what she did, right? And where would we be today if Rosalind had been able to finish her work, whether it was the DNA work she did that she's more known for, or the later work she did with RNA and viruses. That work, which she probably would have won a Nobel Prize for if she had been able to complete it, that work is foundational today to our understanding of COVID and vaccines for the virus. So, her legacy is so vast and ever really expanding in terms of what she could potentially be, what we could potentially be beholden to her for. I think we lost Barbara altogether, but that's okay. I can keep talking.
I'm sorry. Yeah, she'll probably be back momentarily.
No worries.
Boy, I'm not sure.
Or maybe not.
I think so. What's that?
I can talk a little bit about Rosalind and sort of her background.
Yeah, why don't you continue on the what you were saying?
We just started to get into her. So one of the things I like to talk about with Rosalind is, like, we all, if you've heard of her,
Sure.
You think you have an understanding of who she might be, right? She has this, people know that she was a scientist, she was involved in DNA, and they know maybe that her contributions had been marginalized or suppressed in some way. And, there's been like a little bit more awareness of her. There's things like, there was a Google Doodle of her, and there's a medical school named after her. And I think there's even like a Mars rover named after her. So, there's this sense of her accomplishments and in the sense that we want to celebrate her a little bit. But when you actually delve into Rosalind's life, it's unbelievable. I mean, at first I was really kind of prompted to write about her through a friend of mine. You know, I knew Rosalind and I had her on my list, but I didn't know enough about her. And I have this dear friend who's an ER doctor, actually, and she's really a hero in real life. Not to digress too much, but she was the head of the Red Cross during 9/11. She was the first
Oh my
responder.
gosh.
She led those people.
Wow.
And when she called me, she was like, I just read this book, The Gene, which she likes nonfiction, no surprise. It's all about genetics and the history of genetics. And they had a section on Rosalind. And she's like, you have to do her next, right? And, you know, my friends and family know, you know, for better or worse, they've developed their own antenna for these women. They kind of have to. But Callie's not one to like really foist somebody on me, but she was like, do you realize that, as Barbara had just said, that she sacrificed herself to make those discoveries? You know, they had this general sense at the time that that radiation, the radiation you would get from X-rays, which is what Rosalind really dealt in. She used this technique called X-ray crystallography, which is a way of examining atomic or molecular objects and having almost like an image impressed on photographic paper. And then they would go through these unbelievably laborious mathematical calculations to try and create a three-dimensional model of this atom or molecule. And she had been working in this. Hi, Barbara. She'd been working in X-rays and getting this unbelievable exposure, knowing on some level that radiation could be troubling, but like Marie Curie, like Barbara had said, really not letting that get in her way whatsoever. She had blinders on. She was going to go forward and make her discoveries regardless of the potential risks, much like Marie Curie did. And as Barbara mentioned, they both sort of had this drive to unlock these secrets, find these answers. And whether it was hundreds of hours on one particular experiment or the dangers of radiation, they were going to progress and do that.
Have you seen the film Radium Girls? You know, based on the book?
But I read a book. I did an event with Kate Moore, who wrote a book called The Radium Girls, and I think it's about the same
story. Yeah.
Girls who painted those the dials. Was that what it was?
Yes, exactly. That's right.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Sorry, I even called in my own Hedy Lamarr, but he was unable to fix this. I have no idea what's going on. I may have to do these on my phone for a while.
No
I really
worries.
apologize.
No worries at all. We're just chatting Rosalind Franklin, and I was talking no surprise, a little bit about how people generally seem to have an awareness of her, but not really a deep sense of who she was, what her discoveries were, and really the breadth of her legacy, which is enormous. And we were talking about the dangers that both she and somebody like you said, Marie Curie had withstood to their great detriment in order to make those discoveries.
Well, when you're a pioneer, you're not familiar with all the risks and all the rewards and so forth as you go forward. I really like the way you started the book with her experience in Paris. So, because it was such a different environment, so much more supportive for
That's
her than back at Cambridge. But, eventually she ran into another male roadblock, so to speak, in Paris. And so she ended up back at Cambridge. And, I felt really sad for her that because she was such a brave spirit and such a bright woman and all, that she was too intimidating.
That's right.
For the men that she spent her time with to really feel warmly towards her. That was really a shame. However, one of the things I was thinking about, it's easy to say that maybe it was her exposure that caused her cancer, but we don't really know what her genetic history was. And it may be that she was one of those unfortunate people who genetically was programmed to develop cancer. And it might not be a cause and effect at all. It might simply be coincidental that she developed cancer.
It's interesting. There've been a lot written about her life, and that exact question has been raised. And apparently in her, I guess the preponderance of people with her background, with her ethnic background, there is a much higher incidence of that particular form of cancer. But it's also thought to be epigenetic. So while that tendency is there, it needs to have that triggering event. And in Rosalind's case, that triggering event could very well have been that extensive amount of X-ray exposure that she had in order to find that structure of DNA. We'll never know. We really
No,
won't.
you can't prove it. Did either Watson or Crick or any of their team, did they develop unexpected cancers?
Oh, well, Watson and Crick wouldn't have developed it because they didn't do any experiments. So, when you look at what happened, and you look at the fact that, as you mentioned, Rosalind leaves this in many ways very idyllic situation in France. For whatever reason, the French lab that she fortunately ended up at was very welcoming of women. And even Rosalind's personality, which could be perceived as very direct, which wasn't well thought of in England, that's for sure. That quality was actually very well received in France. And as you mentioned, there was a male roadblock, which people will have to read to find out, that really drove her to leave. And she landed in sort of the quintessential old school, male-dominated, clubby English university, King's College. And even though John Randall, who ran their lab, he actually hired quite a few women for the time, it was still a very male-dominated work environment. And there was an unfortunate, right from the beginning, she and Morris Wilkins, who had been working on DNA prior to her arrival, the animosity between them really happened quite from the start. And looking back on it, I think some of that had to do with the fact that Randall, who ran their lab, gave Rosalind DNA and basically took it away from Morris Wilkins. And there was so much anger on his part for it, which was misdirected at Rosalind. But Rosalind wasn't a person who could make nice. That wasn't something that was in her DNA. So, she got to work and spent months and then years piecing together this structure of DNA. When the book opens, scientists really don't understand how DNA works. They have this super vague sense that it has something to do with genes, but they don't know the structure. They don't know how it replicates. They don't know the role it plays, but they have this sense that unlocking the structure will help tell them all that. So Rosalind, uses this X-ray crystallography, exposes herself to thousands of hours of X-ray exposure. They would take these images, which I was describing earlier, and sometimes those images, the X-rays would be penetrating the little DNA sample for 100 hours. And Rosalind would be in and out of the room, making adjustments, direct exposure to the X-rays. So while she's doing all this, getting all these detailed mathematical calculations, doing all these experiments to get the DNA just right, Crick and Watson are actually banned from working on DNA, right? Their lab has an agreement with Rosalind's lab, and they're not supposed to work on DNA. As soon as they get all of her data and her famous photograph 51 and some of her other images from Morris Wilkins, who hands them over for Crick and Watson, within 6 weeks, they built their model. So they never did any of the work. They never did the X-ray crystallography. They never did the mathematical calculations. So those guys, there was no chance they were going to be dying of X-ray exposure. They got all the work and then just built the model. They took it like just that little bit down the finish line.
So this all goes on post-World War II, right? It's 1947 in post-war Paris where she's there. And actually anybody who could leave post-war England where they still didn't have enough anything, soap, let alone food, was, honestly, Robert Harris wrote a really brilliant book about Bletchley. I can't remember what he called it. I don't think it was called Bletchley, but do you remember? I mean, everything in that book was great. And it was the most powerful picture, I thought, of post, World War II and post-war England, when not only, I mean, that's why people my age have terrible teeth, because they didn't have access to Enigma. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick
Oh, that's right.
used to be
That's
not
right.
remembering book titles. But I mean, they didn't have enough vitamin D, enough calcium, they tended to have terrible teeth. But the overall thing that Harris brought across was how grubby everything was, because there wasn't
Right.
enough soap and there wasn't dry cleaning and people wore the same clothes all the time and they couldn't really get, yeah. So if I'd been Rosalind, even
Oh,
though Paris was occupied, it was no longer occupied in 1947, and probably made a much better recovery in terms of the things that ordinary life demands than England. So I would have been happy to have been in Paris in 1947 for
oh,
reasons other than career.
heck yeah. I mean, not only did she have this great career opportunity, but she loved the life there. I mean, of course, Paris is beautiful to begin with, and it wasn't as affected physically as by the war as
No,
London.
amazingly, the Nazis did not destroy it on their way out, even though Hitler ordered them to.
That's right.
The guy in charge ignored that. And
Thank
I've
goodness.
always thought it was a miracle that Paris was not reduced to rubble as they
Right.
exited, because they tended to be pretty vengeful when they departed.
Oh, other European cities were flattened, as they.
Well, that's really true. But Milan, I had a really interesting week in Milan to go to the opera, which is my thing I go do. I was there for Daniel Barenboim at La Scala to hear the Ring Cycle, because I thought once in my life I should sit through the entire Ring Cycle. I'm not a big Wagnerian. But anyway, they point
I'm
out
like,
to you that the cathedral in Milan, which is really just a glorious, fabulous
I've never been.
construction, even though the bombing was terrible, what they did was they lit it every night. And somehow or other, both the Germans and the Allies managed not to drop bombs on that cathedral. I mean, no
Wow.
kidding, really a hairbreadth kind of a thing. And there's also a big gallery right by it, which is like a shopping mall, but a Victorian age shopping mall, and it's all glass, and it survived as well.
Come on,
So
seriously?
yeah,
Miraculous.
I travel, which we're not, excuse me, unfortunately able to do at the moment. Travel can bring to your attention things that, wouldn't occur to you. And so I've always been grateful that Chartres, for example, outside Paris,
Yeah, I love
is
that.
probably the most amazing collection, stunning, surviving glass,
Yeah, beautiful.
of any cathedral. Somehow or other, it too survived, and
Right.
they did not bomb the fabulous glass at Chartres.
That's
So
true. I had never really thought about that before. That's
yeah,
such a fascinating piece. I mean, I knew that there had been those long years of occupation of Paris, and so they were unscathed during that time, unlike London, which was just being barraged every night for long stretches. But that I didn't realize that there was that final order, and
yeah,
that it was ignored, and how beholden we are to that person, probably however horrible they were, for leaving Paris intact. And that's what you're right. That's what Rosalind stepped into. She stepped into a place that was, if not brand spanking shiny, it was intact. They still had rationing there, but it wasn't anything like it was in England. The cultural scene was very vibrant. I mean, she felt that she wrote in some of her letters about how the people seemed more alive, that, it was funny how that had happened, despite the occupation, which she thought would kind of suppress them, make them smaller. They seemed much more alive. They were ready to engage in life. And she really reacted to that. It was such a good fit for her personality. She had this quick mind, and she loved to talk about things other than science. She loved to talk. She was very cultural. She loved to hike and travel, and she wanted to talk about those things. And that sort of very engaged, very accepting of women on all levels, just was something that really wasn't as available. And the other thing that was really different between that Parisian lab and what she encountered in London, at least at King's College, was the social camaraderie in the lab. They would have lunch together every day, and they would go out to cafes at night, and they would take these wonderful hiking weekends together. And it was this sort of big gang, social gang that she was hanging out with. And that is not at all what she encountered when she went to London. It was a world of pubs after work, which really weren't super welcoming to women. There were many, many lunches organized for her biophysics unit, which were held at the all-male cafeteria. The French couldn't understand this English mentality of having all these male activities. Like, why wouldn't you want the women there? And, for Rosalind, that was such a breath of fresh air. And it was very hard for her to go to that lab at King's College. It was really hard. And she knew it going into it, that she would never find again what she had in Paris.
Which possibly explains why she threw herself into her work so fanatically, because there really, wasn't a lot else to glom onto.
No.
She was unmarried. She didn't have children. And so work was really her family, her life. And I think, consciously say it, but reading it, you realize how cruel it was for her to gone to Paris and then had to go back to England, and how devastating really that would have been to her. How old was she when she died? She wasn't terribly old.
She was 36, if that. She was very young. And she had been sick for quite a few years, but she was in typical Rosalind fashion. This was after she had left King's College, where she did the DNA discovery. She went to a place called Birkbeck College. And it really actually was much better. It wasn't Paris, but it was a lot better than King's College. And she worked on RNA and viruses. And she had wonderfully supportive people working with her, all men, of course, but true colleagues, true cohorts. And she created a really wonderful supportive environment there. And in the end, she was so determined to finish her work. Her offices were on the third floor of the fifth floor of a townhouse. And, there were like 6 flights of stairs for her to go up. And in the end, she was so weak, but she was determined every day to get up there and go to her lab. And the men that she worked with, Aaron Klug, who won the Nobel Prize for the work that they did, and all these other graduate students that work with her, they would carry her up so she could do her work. I mean, it was just, the end was just tragic. And those people who really knew her, the people in Paris, the people at Birkbeck, were just devastated when she was gone. Not only because she was a brilliant mind, but because she was a wonderful person as well. And that misunderstanding of who she was, and the refusal in many ways of some of the people she worked with at the King's College lab to see the good qualities and her prickly exterior sometimes, that in many ways is what created the dynamic that allowed for her research and her images to be taken by Maurice Wilkins and given to Francis Crick and James Watson.
I'm glad you're there to correct the record. I think fictionalized lives, there often are better insights that you can have into a person's life than if you try to do a true biography, really sticking to the facts. And you can put your writer's imagination and sensitivity into the story. And, I thought, I couldn't help but think after I read it that I think I have this right, that the CRISPR technology, which is such a remarkable genetic editing tool and so forth, it's a woman, isn't it, who is actually the leading scientist for that. And I thought, if Rosalind, if there's anything to the afterlife, Rosalind would be really pleased by that, to see
I
that.
think so. And, her discoveries basically led to that. There are so many amazing women today. Like, look at all the women who are involved in creating the COVID vaccines. There's tons of them for different labs and different universities and different companies. They're standing on her shoulders. And I do think you're right. I do think she'd look back, and if she could, and be thankful that it isn't that way for them. That, and that's not to say they haven't had hardships, a lot of those women, and there still is some misogyny in science is very male dominated still, but it has come a long way since Rosalind's day. And I think that would delight her to see that. I really do.
I'm sure it would. I'm sure that the story, I can't remember that you said the women, it was a wonderful movie that worked on NASA,
Oh,
and
Hidden Figures.
yes, thank you.
I
There was
love that
another
movie.
woman combining, well, I mean, she wasn't passing for white, she was
Yeah,
black, and that was it all the way through. But
yeah.
their contributions that she and those other women made to the space program. I love the fact that that's come out. So Marie, who are you looking at next now that you really got your teeth into this, whole sort of thing?
I love it. Well, my next book that comes out next January is called The Midford Affair. And it delves into, I see the look on
I'm
your
a
face.
walking encyclopedia of the Mitford. I'm
Are
sorry, you
you?
should never have said that. I have actually had tea with the Duchess before she
No
died
way.
in the
Of
state
Devon?
of Chatsworth.
No
No,
way. How did
no,
I not
really,
know
yeah.
that?
Yep. So, and there was a wonderful, I'm trying to remember, wasn't it PBS did a wonderful
Recently.
about the Reedsdales and, their various books. I mean, six sisters who just
Mhm.
astonishing. Which are you
Oh,
focusing on all of them or only one?
I'm focusing on 3. I mean, as you know, for people who don't know, they were like the it girls of the 20s and 30s, but they were so much more than that. I mean,
Yeah.
each one was more beautiful and unique and eccentric than the next.
Can I guess which 3?
I'm sorry?
Can I
Oh,
guess
which
which
3?
3?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Who do you think?
All right. I think Diana, because of her marriage to Mosley and so forth, would have been interesting.
Yeah,
Nancy probably because she was the author. You see,
yeah.
I would have done Deborah because I loved her life, but you might very well have picked let's see, not Unity or whatever. Who would be the third one? Diana and Nancy. Who's the third one?
Unity. It is Unity.
You did decide to do Unity.
And the
Really?
reason is because what the focus of the book is those years leading up to World War II. And what the declassified MI5 documents showed was a lot of what Unity, who, for people who don't know, became, for lack of a better word, the companion of Hitler. I mean, they were, there's been a lot of rumors of other types of relationships, but at a minimum, she was very close to Hitler, a vehement Nazi. And Diana, of course, was married to Oswald Mosley, who's the head of the British Society of Fascists, and they were working together, primarily Diana with Hitler. But Diana and Hitler had their own relationship, and they were funneling money. They were creating a radio station together. These 4, but really Diana and Hitler, in many ways, on behalf of Mosley, were creating a relationship that, in some ways, would level the playing field, make it easy for the Nazis to come into Britain should they prevail. And Nancy has the opportunity to basically spy on her sisters. She has to take a look at what her sisters are doing and weigh and balance whether she wants to do what's right for her country or stay loyal to her sisters, despite the fact that she's fearful for what they actually might do. And
it's a really interesting dynamic. And of course, Deborah, being the youngest one, probably, didn't enter into the Deborah, for those who don't know it, she married the second son of the Duke of Devonshire, and then the older one was killed in the war. So she became sort of accidentally the Duchess of Devonshire. And one of the things I love about the Devonshires is they live at Chatsworth. And my favorite Elizabethan is not Queen Elizabeth, but rather Elizabeth Shrewsbury, who went from being an orphan to the wealthiest woman in England through a succession of amazing marriages. She was the jailer of Mary, Queen of Scots. She outlived her husbands, and the Chatsworths, the Devonshires, are still living on the estate that she created in the 16th century. I mean,
okay, you and I need to talk because I do not know this woman. Has there already?
If you want to do a book together about her, I'm all for it, because there's only one I've ever found, but I think she is a phenomenal character. Her grasp of finance and so forth is amazing. But anyway, the Chatsworth, which is a fabulous estate, is still
Yeah.
there. But what Deborah did was that she turned it because the death duties when her husband's father, the Duke, died, and then also the Duke, her husband, were so crushing that they had to make decisions about selling property or how to run it. So she turned it into a money machine. She created a whole food thing, you know, gardening, and sold it through the shop at the estate. She, you know, opened it to the public. She opened, I stayed at her, she and the Duke each opened a hotel on the property, and I stayed at her hotel, but other people have stayed at his hotel.
Wow.
Anyway, she is a throwback. She, you know, with no real training for it, a throwback to Elizabeth Shrewsbury in the
that's
sense that she
amazing.
understood estate management and financing. She only died very recently.
Very recently. Yeah, I remember reading a piece on her not that long ago, and just thinking about, and this is before I started writing the book, about how she was the last living
She was.
Midford.
Yep.
And in many ways, she was like the penultimate one. You know, she really came into her own when all these other sisters really took on so many different sorts of personalities. And I mean, we could go on and on all day about that, but Jessica Mitford, the communist, you know, who came to America. I mean, everything was going on. Like basically the whole 20th century was embodied in that family. It was
and Lord Redesdale. I mean, it was, you know, the Redesdale is their actual family or title, and they had one son, and he tragically died in the war. So, you know, it was a real family tragedy. But their upbringing was entirely unconventional. And,
totally.
Probably account, but it is interesting that we had a communist, we had the fascist, we have two writers, you know, we have so much embodied in those six sisters. And one of them, I'm trying to remember which one she is, because she's the one you never hear about, lived very quietly in the country.
That's Pamela. She actually, but she herself was during the war. She was also a fascist. Her husband, her first husband, Derek. And he had money. I can't remember. I don't know if he was titled or not. He was a physicist. And
I don't think so.
And then when they divorced, and she actually lived, she was like a horsewoman, very much into country life. She actually had a female partner for many decades, which of course was like scandalous at the time. But so she kind of had her own thing going on. But Duchess of Deborah was the one who really embodied that like quintessential, you know, what we think of as, you know, aristocratic English life.
Right. Such a contrast. Well, when this book comes out, we're definitely going to have to.
I can't wait.
We could rip right into it. I will dig out. I'm looking over there at a biography of Deborah, or maybe it's her autobiography, which I love. Anyway, let's call Patrick up in case one, I flip out, but two, we might actually have questions again.
I would love it.
There he is.
Hi. Let's see here. What do we got? Yeah. Okay. There's some really good comments as well. Cheryl says, it's so sad that these women risk their lives for humanity and have become very marginalized in history. Amen.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's what drives me. Really, it drives my mission.
Yeah. Let's see here. Questions. I put a net out. Margie says, this is fascinating, this discussion of your next book. And Barbara, I want to travel with you.
Me too. I want to travel with Barbara. I can't wait till everything. When we do our Elizabeth Shrewsbury book, I know where we're going. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
You bet. Original research right there on Chatsworth. You bet. And if the same chef is there, here's another great story. So I've been at this hotel where I've had tea with the Duchess for several days. And it has a relatively intimate dining room, but in British hotels, breakfast is part of the deal. So on my third morning there, as I'm sitting there ordering my blood sausage, whenever this figure looms up beside me. So I look up because he's huge and he's wearing a big white toque and he's got on the white apron and the whole bit. And he smiled at me and he said, "Do you have dinner plans?" And I said, "No, I'm traveling by myself." And he said, "I'd like to invite you to eat in the kitchen." and I will cook a special dinner for you. And I was dumbfounded. I looked, I said, why? You know, I mean, I'd love to, that'd be wonderful, but why are you asking? And he said, I've been watching what you're ordering. He said, you're the only American here who's ever ordered the blood sausage. So I feel like I can cook for you. And he did. And he made me like wood pigeon and all the, I mean, you know, whatever. But the real magic of dessert in England is that everything comes with cream. I mean, everything gets custard or cream. And he taught me that there is such a thing as a dessert sampler that you can order in good English restaurants. And what they do is they'll take like a big wide dish, and then they will give you little bits of all the desserts so that
That's
you know.
what I would want.
No kidding, it was wonderful. I did this in Woodstock, and when I went to visit Blenheim Castle, and I taught them at the, trying to remember the name of the famous inn in Woodstock. We did the same. But anyway, the thing that's so ironic is you have this basin and you've got all these gorgeous desserts, you know, little bites ringed around it in the whole bit, and then they pick up a jug of cream or custard and they go, and it all kind of dissolves into one, you know, enormous
Mushy mass.
Right.
But probably a delicious mushy mass, I'm
It's
guessing.
wonderful. But I will never, ever forget. I had my own table in the kitchen and they set it beautifully. And I'm kind of over here in a corner. And I think it was like 11 different courses. And of course, it was all little bitty because, you know, I'm kind of little bitty. But it was just a magical
When was this,
experience.
Barbara?
I've never forgotten it. What?
When was this?
When was it? 1980. When was it? 1986.
Oh, okay. So this is pre-Rob.
It was. I went to England in my transition from my life in law and in living in the South, where I actually never belonged, to Arizona, which was the result of a medical incident I won't even go into. I took off for 5 months and I went to England. It was the first time in my life I had ever been on my own, done everything on my own. It was before cell phones, and also my family didn't even know where I was most of the time. I rented a car. I should have bought one. I was too stupid to figure that out. And I spent 5 months just going around England doing all these wonderful things. And
That sounds amazing. I definitely want to travel with you. Oh my gosh. How
Well,
dreamy does that sound?
it was great. And Patrick is right. My husband is the sort of traveler who, before we leave home, has already made reservations at every Michelin restaurant he can find. So
I might want to
Serious
another
duty.
one.
yep, he did. First time we went to France together, he faxed ahead to Trois Gros outside of Lyon, because it, you know, made lunch reservations. And to Rob, that was sort of normal trip planning. Is first you figured out where you wanted to eat, and then you worked out the whole itinerary around it.
How fabulous is that? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
he's fun to travel with. He's
You
like a
guys make
human
me very
dowser for
hungry also.
restaurants.
This
I-
must be hard for you not with the not traveling, you know?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've done other things, and I just exchanged emails with a friend in England that we met on the Northwest Passage cruise. We took the Crystal first cruise around Alaska and all the way east, you know, the John Franklin thing, but in reverse to Greenland and on. And they were with us, and they said that they have refocused on traveling in the UK. They're going to go to the Edinburgh Tattoo. They've been to Cornwall and all. So we are booked to go down the Mississippi in the fall and take a Great Lakes cruise from Duluth to Toronto. And then we might escape to Tahiti at the end of April, but I haven't quite decided. That's not an
That's like
American trip. But we should explore our own country more. You know, it's wonderful to go to all these other places.
I
But
agree.
the truth is, I think in this reset, that traveling here,
It's pretty
is-
amazing.
yeah, you know, we.
You're
I
right.
do have a good question that just kind of came in.
Oh, good.
We have time to ask it. Let's see. Lisa wants to know, she says, what is your research and writing process like? And have you ever researched a woman and decided not to write about her? And if so, why?
Good question.
Good, that's a really good question. I'll start with that one. Yes, I have. You know, sometimes I think I mentioned I keep that really long list of women, and sometimes I'll dig into that initial research and I just don't feel it. You know, sometimes there's not enough meat to the story to make it really interesting. Sometimes the woman might not. I'm really looking for two things. You know, I'm looking for them to have this really long, important legacy, and I'm also looking for them to have something of interest in their life. Some they're sort of struggling with more modern day issues so the readers can relate. And sometimes they don't have that. Sometimes their lives are pretty steady, and that does not make for good reading all the time. So I definitely have started research into women and saying, no, I'm not, that's just not the right one. But in terms of the research, it's so different for each woman because I go where the woman leads me, right? Some writers write about one particular time period, and I always kind of admire that. I tend to go wherever they go. So if they're from England, I'll go there. If they're from, another part of the world, I'll go there. Whatever time period suits, and I'll figure it out as I go. But the process is kind of similar, no matter who they are and what or where they're from. The first layer is, of course, looking for the original source material, finding the letters, the journals, an autobiography, diaries, things like that in the woman's own hand or written to her right around that time period. That for me is the way to get into their head, their voice, to really understand the woman and not just be looking at somebody else's perception of the woman, right, in a biography. I will use a biography if I can't find what I'm looking for. And then I really cast my net wide, and I'm looking at everything. I'm looking at all the macro research I can. I want to know about the political developments, cultural, social, really to understand what might be influencing the woman at that time period, things that she might be dealing with. And then micro too. I want to know everything about the world that she inhabits, the kind of wallpaper they have, what kind of clothes she might wear, what she's going to eat for dessert, what's her favorite, all those things to really bring her to life in a way that I really hope makes her come off the page. And really,
What about flaws? Do you find yourself ever censoring the flaws?
No, I don't.
No.
And I mean, I do worry about that a little bit sometimes because, I read about people who did live once and they do have families. And these books really are my way of honoring the woman, but I'm not gonna, gloss over the flaws. The flaws very often are what make us extraordinary, which make us different. Sometimes it's the very flaw that, for example, with Rosalind Franklin, that prickly exterior that was in part, not that it was her fault, but in part is what caused that acrimonious situation at King's College and led to some of the things that happened. I don't fault her for that. I think that was a function of her time period, but that flaw is hugely important into what happened in the story. And sometimes having a flaw that you have to overcome and deal with, strengthens the character, makes the woman go in a particular direction in their lives. You can't gloss over those. Now, do I, lift up every rock and tell about every nasty thing that's underneath it? No, I might pick and choose. There might be some things that I leave out, but not if it's important to the story. I won't do that. And I have to say, to date, I have spoken with almost every single one of my books, including this one I just today I've talked to Rosalind's nephew, and I'm going to have a conversation next week with her niece. To my great delight, all the family members who I have been in contact with have been delighted. Even if it's not always a perfectly flattering portrait, they recognize that it's my way of really giving their relative a second life, right? A life that they were deprived of when they were actually alive. So, and that means a lot to me. It really does.
Sounds like a great note to end on.
It really does. I would ask you, why is it that science, because you have skewed more towards women in science than in any other field, what is it about science that's so interesting to you?
It's kind of crazy that I have, because up until recently, I was the opposite of a science. I fled from science.
Oh, well, me too. That's why I asked.
Yeah. I think two things. First, I think I started to think differently about science because, as I mentioned, I have a son who, when he was in 5th grade, decided he wanted to be a physicist, taught himself physics, and that has never wavered. And the lens through which he looks at the world is the lens of science. And he has given me a completely different appreciation for science. It has become interesting to me. It has become, one of those crucial life questions that really runs through everything. And I think the other thing that draws me to these scientists is, I'm really interested in women who have left behind a really tangible legacy. That is very easy to see in science, right? It's harder sometimes in other disciplines to see the tangible importance of the legacy. With science, with Mileva, she helped create the theory of relativity. With Hedy Lamarr, she helped create Wi-Fi. With Rosalind Franklin, she basically discovered the structure of DNA. So you can see those very tangible contributions, and you can play out across time exactly how important they are. And so that to me it's very tempting to tell those stories.
It's interesting because
That's a wonderful answer.
today the with the people mapping the human genome,
Oh yeah.
there's probably some fascinating women scientists involved in that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you can see Rosalind Franklin's work, and you can see a ladder of women who have stood on the foundation that she created, and that's really an amazing, beautiful thing.
It's funny. My wife was a physics major, and when she went to ASU and got her degree in physics, there was just like one or two women,
So few.
Very male.
Even now.
Yeah, still.
Now.
Well, I hope that you've been moved by this discussion to think that you would like to read this book. And if you're going to do that, you might as well buy an autographed copy of it.
Absolutely.
As opposed to a not autographed copy anywhere else. So we definitely want to encourage you to do that. We still have some. Marie kindly signed them and they shipped in. So don't waste any time in getting one. Thank you for a really fascinating conversation. And my apologies again for literally flipping out. I don't quite know how that works.
We had it under control. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. It has been just sheer delight, and I cannot wait to talk to you about the Midfords. Oh my goodness.
Well, we will definitely do that. And if you've already finished your book about the Midfords, it's done.
It's nearly finished. We're in the last
because you could make an interesting little parallel, though Nancy isn't Deborah's not your character, but you could slip in the idea that Deborah is basically Elizabeth Shrewsbury.
That to me sounds like an entirely different book.
Well,
a
maybe
book unto itself.
We can think about that. I like that. Okay. Anyway, good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much
pleasure. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.